Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of Cannabis Common Sense and our pandemic hemp news segments. We are running a whole bunch of different videos and creating a newscast on Tuesday afternoon and then uploading it to our cable television system here in Portland, Oregon on Wednesdays. So it goes out on cablecast throughout Northeast Oregon on Friday. And then we put it up there too. But hopefully we'll be back with our live version as soon as they open up our studios and the schools and the stores and everything. It's been an unusual time, but we are charging on. Our first story tonight comes from down under, down in New Zealand. New Zealand's government has revealed the final details of a marijuana legalization proposal that will appear on the September 2020 New Zealand general election ballot. Voters will decide on a policy change through a referendum where they will be asked yes or no to approving the Cannabis Legalization and Control Bill. Early details about the measure were released in December, and on Friday, the government shared the full proposal, which would make it legal for adults 20 years of age and older to purchase and possess cannabis, cultivate 2 plants for personal use, and visit marijuana shops or coffee shops where on-site consumption would be allowed. Individuals would be able to purchase up to 14 grams of cannabis from licensed retailers and also gift up to 14 grams to another adult. At the beginning of the implementation, if voters approved the measure, retailers could only sell cannabis plants and seeds, but a regulatory body established under the bill called the Cannabis Regulatory Authority of New Zealand would later be able to approve the introduction of other licensed products for sale, including concentrates and cannabis edibles, through regulations, according to a summary. The summary also says medicinal cannabis and hemp will not be affected by the outcome of the referendum. Medicinal use of cannabis will still be allowed if prescribed by a doctor, and hemp will still be legal, end quote. The New Zealand government explained that the purpose of the legislation is to mitigate the illicit market, promote public health, and ensure quality control of marijuana products. Cannabis businesses would be banned from advertising under the measure. If more than 50% of New Zealand voters approved the ballot question, cannabis wouldn't be immediately legalized. Rather, it would be incumbent upon the New Zealand legislature to pass the bill that's subject of the referendum, which would come after legislatures gathered public input on the reform move. While some wanted the referendum to be self-executing, meaning the law would take effect as soon as it was approved by voters, this version is binding in the sense that lawmakers are effectively required to pass the bill, but could still be amended, and it's not clear how significant those changes could end up being. According to a report released this week by the New Zealand Institute of Economic Research, New Zealand stands to generate $490 million in tax revenue annually from legal cannabis sales, through the projections dependent on illicit sales being largely replaced by the regulated market. The 3 main political parties in New Zealand reached an agreement on the basic details of the legislation referendum and released that information in May of last year. The referendum on the issue is the product of a deal that the Green Party struck after agreeing to help install Labour Party head Jacinda Ardern as the Prime Minister following the 2017 election. A member of the New Zealand Parliament, Chloe Schwarbrick of the Green Party, said, quote, "It's taken 2.5 years of negotiation behind the scenes across our parliament and decades of work by activists, advocates, and researchers who have sought to understand how best to create an evidence-informed approach to reduce drug harm in our communities. We're taking this conversation out of the petty partisan politics arena and placing it in the hands of you, New Zealand's voters," end quote. The Green Party also said that with the new legislation, there is, quote, "now have a clearer vision of how a safe, regulated cannabis market would work in New Zealand and a chance to ditch the dangerous black market for good," end quote. It remains to be seen whether New Zealand voters will back the proposal, as polling on the issue has elicited mixed results. One of the most recent surveys released in March showed that 54% of New Zealand residents are in favor of legalizing marijuana for personal use, a 6% point increase since the last previous poll. Here in Oregon, the Dr. Bronner Soap Company announced it's contributed $1 million to the psilocybin therapy legalization campaign in Oregon. The cash infusion, first reported by Double Blind Magazine, was announced last week by David Bronner, the CEO of Dr. Bronner's brand. Oregon's Initiative Petition 34 aims to legalize the therapeutic use of psilocybin, which is touted by many as the next step in progressive drug policy reform. Psilocybin is in the final stages of studies for FDA approval as therapy for treatment-resistant depression. The initiative currently has just over 130,000 signatures, but will require 145,000 before it can be approved for November's ballot. If approved, Initiative Petition 34 would establish a state framework for medical access to psilocybin, which comes from mushrooms, which is a Schedule I drug under federal law. Specifically, the proposal would create a patient screening process as well as Centers for Distribution Administration, which should all be overseen by the Oregon Health Authority. What could go wrong? The state would create research-based programs to handle everything from spore to patient, including cultivating the mushrooms, overseeing the training for facilitators, and administration of the medicines. When asked why Bronner was supporting the medical initiatives as opposed to decriminalization-focused campaign, Bronner said that the measure wouldn't rely on, quote, exorbitant taxes beyond what's needed to cover the program, end quote, so it should be relatively affordable versus otherwise. Bronner went on to say, quote, definitely programs sponsoring the most indigent, marginalized, and traumatized communities should be developed, and we're actively looking at this with other donors, end quote, David Bronner said. Also in Oregon, a separate proposed ballot measure would decriminalize possession of all illicit drugs and use existing marijuana tax revenue to fund expanded treatment services. Activists in nearby Washington state are also working on a similar drug decriminalization and treatment measure. In the Midwest, with North Dakota among the states gradually reopening business amid the coronavirus pandemic, there's renewed hope that a campaign to legalize marijuana could soon proceed after temporarily suspending signature gathering. But because of the setback in signature gathering efforts in recent weeks, activists say it's more likely that the initiative will appear on the state's 2022 ballot rather than the one voters will see this November. Legalize North Dakota, the group behind the measure, said last month that door-to-door signature collection would be put on pause due to the risk of spreading the coronavirus. Many businesses that carried the petition on site were also shuttered due to the state orders and social distancing requirements. The organization's proposed initiative would allow adults to purchase and possess up to 2 ounces of cannabis. Unlike a much more far-reaching proposal the same group pushed in 2018 that included no possession or cultivation limits, which voters rejected, this version would prohibit home growing, impose a 10% excise tax, and establish a regulatory body to approve licenses for marijuana businesses. Voters previously approved a medical cannabis legalization measure in 2016. On Monday, the campaign signaled that activities may continue again on a limited basis now that North Dakota has entered into a first phase of reopening and allowing business to resume operations. Legalized North Dakota is soliciting input from businesses that have their petitions available for patients to sign, although they said they feel it's too soon to have petitioners go door to door to gather signatures. To qualify for the November ballot, North Dakota's activists would have to collect 13,452 valid North Dakota voter signatures by July 6th. But if they don't make that cut, and organizers say it's likely that it won't be possible in that time frame, the signatures they've collected so far won't go to waste. They have a full calendar year from the launch of the campaign to gather the required signatures to appear on the next election cycle. In this case, that means legalized North Dakota has until December to meet that requirement and qualify for the July 2022 primary election. The debate over how and when to let petitioners go door to door largely comes down to differences in opinion from rural and urban areas of the state. The Montana cannabis legalization campaign that sued the state to allow digital signature collection had their case dismissed last week, but organizers say they may file an appeal and will be pushing ahead despite the legal setback. Meanwhile, in Arizona, The organizers of a legalization effort are petitioning the state Supreme Court to instruct the Secretary of State to allow people to sign campaign petitions digitally using an existing electronic system that's currently reserved for individual candidates seeking public office in Arizona. A California campaign seeking to amend the state's cannabis laws also asked for digital petitioning options. The campaign to legalize cannabis in Missouri officially gave up its efforts for the 2020 campaign last month due to signature collection being virtually impossible in the face of social distancing measures. Idaho medical cannabis activists announced that they are suspending their ballot campaign, though they're still focusing on distributing petitions through online download at idahocannabisco, and encouraging every voter who's downloaded a petition to get them turned in by their county clerk's office by mail, regardless of how many signatures they've collected. And then activists behind a campaign to legalize medical cannabis in Nebraska are holding out hope that they'll qualify a recently unveiled new strategy to put their petition on the ballot. In New York, Governor Andrew Cuomo conceded last month that the 2020 legalization push is effectively over in the legislature. Coronavirus shifted priorities and comprehensive cannabis reform seem to have proved too complicated for New York's legislatures an issue in this short term. There have also been several COVID-related developments on the psychedelic reform front as well. California activists had hoped to get a measure to legalize psilocybin on their state's November ballot, but the campaign stalled out with the coronavirus pandemic. Washington, D.C. activists behind the psychedelics decriminalization campaign are more confident that they'll be able to make the ballot after the district council voted in favor of a series of changes to petitioning gathering protocol on Tuesday. The campaign also has a new strategy to test the waters and deliver petitions and mailers directly to voters who could then sign and send them back. Okay, back over to the national campaign for president. Former Vice President Joe Biden is using a newly released plan on racial justice to tout his existing modest marijuana reform proposals. The presumptive 2020 Democratic presidential nominee said he would, quote, decriminalize the use of cannabis and automatically expunge all prior cannabis use convictions, end quote, as part of a, quote, plan for Black America, end quote. His campaign released on Monday. He also talked about changing broader criminal justice policies, including ending the crack versus cocaine sentencing disparity, repealing mandatory minimums, abolishing the death penalty, and diverting people with minor drug convictions to treatment instead of prison. While I generally welcome the proposals, Biden does not go far enough to fully address racial equity. Notably, absent from his plan is legalizing marijuana for adult use, something that's critical to ensure equity and restorative justice. True equity must include a release of all cannabis prisoners, massive community investment, and a legal cannabis marketplace owned and operated by people of color and other affected communities. I'm not convinced Biden is there yet, but we must all continue to push him for the sake of our communities. What's more, while Biden's treatment for substance misuse proposal is viewed as superior to incarceration, I oppose forcing individuals into treatment as a mandate from drug courts, which continue to handle a health issue through a criminal justice lens. We cannot forget Biden's record as a senator, condemning his role in authoring and promoting punitive anti-drug laws that contributed to mass incarceration, including mandatory minimums for marijuana growers. As its ongoing opposition to legalization, a policy supported by a majority of Democratic voters, particularly young people, has been a lingering source of frustration. By comparison, Senator Bernie Sanders, who was also a top contender as a presidential candidate before dropping out and endorsing Biden last month, has been a strong champion of comprehensive reform, pledging to legalize marijuana in all 50 states on his first day in office through executive action, for example. While Biden has thus far refused to embrace federal legalization, he and Sanders did announce the formation of a joint criminal justice working group comprised of individuals who've worked with both of them, and it stands to reason that cannabis policy could be one of the areas of discussion. That said, asked last month what issue he thinks Biden will come around to that he campaigned on, Sanders declined to include marijuana legalization in that list. The former vice president's new racial justice plan doesn't feature any new drug policy proposals. Rather, it highlights previous measures that have particular relevance to minority communities. Also on a national basis, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is seeking public comments on how Americans with chronic pain are successfully treating their symptoms. The call for comments, posted on April 17th at regulations.gov, states, quote, interested persons or organizations are invited to participate by submitting written views, recommendations, and data related to perspectives on and experiences with pain and pain management. CDC invites comments specifically on topics focused on using or prescribing opioid pain medications, non-opioid medications, or non-pharmacological treatments, end quote. The CDC's interest in alternative methods of chronic pain management may be of particular significance to many medical cannabis patients. According to state registry records, quote, chronic pain is currently and historically the most common qualifying condition reported by medical cannabis patients at 67.5% in 2016, end quote. This finding is hardly a surprise, as cannabis is well established to mitigate pain in clinical models, particularly in patients with neuropathy. Additional clinical trial data indicates that cannabinoids possess synergistically activity with opioids, which may allow for opioid treatment at lower doses with fewer patient side effects, end quote. Among pain patients enrolled in medical cannabis access programs, most subjects report eventually decreasing or even eliminating their use of opiates. States the CDC, quote, public comment will help CDC's understanding of stakeholders' values and preferences regarding pain management and will complement CDC's ongoing work assessing the need for updating or expanding the CDC guideline for prescribing opiates for chronic pain, end quote. That said, it cautions that any public comments received are part of the public record and are subject to public disclosure. Comments will be posted on regulations.gov. That's regulations.gov. If you're interested in making a public record of your opposition to opiates or use of cannabis, we invite you to go to regulations.gov and look up that Center for Disease Control's input on chronic pain. Our next story is from Baltimore, Maryland. Access to cannabis reduces patients' perceived demand for opioids, according to data published in the Journal of Psychopharmacology. A team of investigators affiliated with Johns Hopkins School of Medicine assessed whether or not cannabis availability would hypothetically influence pain patients' demand for prescription opioids. 155 subjects with recent experience using both opioids and cannabis for pain management participated in the survey. The authors reported, quote, our demand analysis suggests that availability of cannabis decreased opioid consumption intensity and increased the degree to which opioid consumption was influenced by opioid price elasticity. The authors concluded, quote, these results suggest cannabis may confer an opioid-sparing effect in this population, end quote. The authors' findings are consistent with many other studies we reported on this show over the years. And the full text of this study, evaluating the co-use of opioids and cannabis for pain among current users using hypothetical purchase tasks, appears in this month's edition of the Journal of Psychopharmacology. In New Jersey, more than 6 in 10 registered New Jersey voters say they intend to vote for a statewide ballot measure this November to legalize the adult use cannabis market, according to polling data compiled by Monmouth University. 61% of respondents said that they will vote for the measure, which amends the New Jersey Constitution to permit the possession, production, and retail sale of cannabis to those aged 21 and older. Lawmakers in 2019 overwhelmingly voted to place the measure on the 2020 November ballot after similar legislation failed to gain majority support in New Jersey Senate. The proposed ballot question reads, quote, do you approve amending the Constitution to legalize a controlled form of marijuana called cannabis? Only adults at least 21 years of age could use cannabis. The state commission created to oversee the state's medical cannabis program would also oversee the new personal use cannabis market. Cannabis products would be subject to the state sales tax. If authorized by the legislature, a municipality may pass a local ordinance to charge a local tax on cannabis products, end quote. New Jersey is one of the limited number of states that will have marijuana-related questions appear on the November ballot. If the ballot measure is approved by voters, New Jersey would join 11 other states and Washington, D.C. in legalizing the adult use of marijuana. All but 2 states have done so via voter initiative. Our next story is from San Francisco. Adults who use cannabis for therapeutic purposes are most likely to report consuming it to address symptoms of anxiety, insomnia, chronic pain, and depression, according to data published in the Journal of General Internal Medicine. Researchers from the University of California at San Francisco analyzed responses from a nationally representative online sample of adults. Among those who acknowledged using cannabis for medical purposes, 49% reported doing so to treat anxiety. 47% respondents said that they used cannabis for insomnia. 42% said they did so to treat chronic pain, and 39% said that cannabis eased their depression. Respondents' most preferred method of cannabis ingestion was inhalation. Women more frequently than men reported using cannabis to address symptoms of post-traumatic stress, insomnia, anxiety, and migraines. Men were more likely to report using cannabis as a mood stabilizer. Of those respondents who would disclose their medical cannabis use to their primary care physician, nearly half said their doctor was supportive of their decision. The study's findings are consistent with prior data indicating that patients are most likely to report using medical cannabis in the treatment of either chronic pain or mental health symptoms. This study, Medical Reasons for Marijuana Use, Forms of Use, and Patient Perception of Physician Attitudes Among the U.S. Population, appears in this month's edition of the Journal of Internal Medicine. Our last story tonight is from Washington, D.C. Officials with the U.S. Department of Agriculture are continuing to approve plans regulating domestic hemp production. Under federal law, states wishing to license commercial hemp production must submit their plans for approval from the federal agency. In recent weeks, the Farm Bureau has approved plans submitted by regulators in Florida, Kansas, South Carolina, West Virginia. Earlier this year, the agency signed off on plans in Delaware, Georgia, Louisiana, Montana, Nebraska, New Jersey, Ohio, Texas, Washington State, and Wyoming. Last October, the agency issued interim rules governing the commercial production of cannabis containing no more than 0.3% or less than 1/3 of 1% THC and products containing cannabinoids derived from hemp. Well, that is the end of our hemp news segment for tonight. We've got some other videos to fill out the rest of our hour-long show. I want to thank you folks for watching. Hang in there, stay healthy, travel safely, and help restore hemp.
Join with us and make a big old scene, because if we're all together, we're really loud and they can't ignore us any longer.
It takes everybody here to go out there and to make a difference. Talk to your legislatures, because now they're going to be running for office. They're going to be coming asking you for your vote. And that's, they want your vote, so you're going to have to ask them, where do they stand on cannabis, right? So ask them, how do they stand, where they stand with cannabis.
They're not going to stop us. They're just going to incarcerate us, and it needs to end yesterday.
Marijuana is not going to re-legalize itself. And if you're not registered to vote, then you're not going to be part of making it change.
We need to stop pretending that the drug war is working. We need to stop pretending that DARE is working, because none of them are working. None of them are working. So please do what you can to support ending cannabis prohibition as we know it.
But it's real important to support the OCTA, the I-24, the Sensibles, the whatever that comes upon you for freedom, man, and for what your rights are. I mean, a lot of these, they're so close, they're all on this train, they're different, they're all part of different groups, but they're all on the same train, and they get on that train in the morning and they cruise forward. And that's what we got to do. Our train in our community is one train, and that's the cannabis train. And we all need to get on the cannabis train and chug a lug for freedom.
Oregon has led in innovation nationally. We protected our beaches, the bottle bill, land use. 40 years ago, Oregon was the first state to decriminalize marijuana. And I was an impressionable young legislator, actually voted on that legislation. And there was another debate that occurred during that session. It was led by a conservative Republican pig farmer from Hermiston, Oregon, a remarkable gentleman named Stafford Hansel, who had a distinguished career as a long-term state legislator. He was active in administration. He helped protect the land use system. But Stafford gave what I think was one of the most compelling speeches I've ever heard in my life. Here was a conservative Republican, didn't smoke, drink, swear, who got up and led the state legislature through a tutorial. He pointed out a package of cigarettes that killed 400,000 people a year that was legal. He had a bottle of Jack Daniels. I think it may have been the only time he'd ever held a bottle of liquor. And he pointed out that for some people, alcohol was toxic, and it contributed to the deaths of tens of thousands of people on a highway each year. And then he had a baggie with a marijuana cigarette. And he pointed out that people didn't die from it, that it wasn't as addictive, it wasn't as destructive, and that it was illegal. And he proceeded to defend a bill we had on the floor of the House that would have authorized 2 plants for personal consumption. I'm told by knowledgeable people at the Capitol at that time, if the 19 of us who voted for it had been joined by the people who voted no but smoked dope, that it probably would have passed, and Oregon would have been the first state to legalize adult use. At the same time, Oregon was having this discussion about a more rational approach to marijuana. We were watching at the federal level a war on drugs being launched in the Nixon administration. And it had a much different approach to marijuana. The legacy of that war on drugs was classifying marijuana as a Schedule I drug. The consequences of that are legion. First and foremost, as you know, classifying marijuana as being as dangerous as heroin or LSD is simply false. It's false. Telling people that it is more dangerous than cocaine or methamphetamines, Schedule II, the meth epidemic that is destroying rural and small town communities, suggests we've got our priorities upside down. It also suggests to me part of a need to reappraise what can only be described as a failed war on drugs. We're spending $25 billion a year. We are arresting 750,000 people a year for something that most Americans now think should be legal. And there are, as you're well aware, some of the most egregious racial disparities targeting young African American men greater than any other sector of the population, even though their use is no greater, maybe even a little less, than white young men. And there are people doing time now as a result of the consequences of this act. We've been involved in Congress in the effort to help rationalize our drug treatment, drug approaches. Part of it is to make sure that the federal government is not interfering in medical marijuana. Part of the lie in federal statute as a category with Schedule I narcotic, it has no medicinal therapeutic value. Not true. And luckily, voters starting in California in 1996 as the first state, followed by Oregon in the next election, we now have 21 states and the District of Columbia representing over 106 million Americans who have access that's legal under state law to medical marijuana. A million Americans now are legally authorized to have access, and I have heard countless stories about the difference that it has made in their lives. Part of what we're doing in Congress, and I will tell you, I'm encouraged because we now have 13 pieces of legislation, most of it bipartisan, to try and bring some sense into this upside-down world that is marijuana regulation in the United States. We have legislation and bipartisan support to stop the lunacy of making legal marijuana businesses be all cash enterprises. What's the logic here? If you care about money laundering, if you care about tax evasion, or just burglary, forcing perfectly legal enterprises to pay their taxes with a shopping bag full of $20 bills doesn't make any sense at all. Or because of a quirk in the tax law, forcing them to pay 2 and 3 times higher tax rates, again for perfectly legal businesses, is wrong. But I will tell you, some of you are familiar with a conservative Republican tax advocate, Grover Norquist. Grover was with me at a press conference for my bill to allow legal marijuana businesses to deduct their business expenses. That's how far we're coming. That's how far we're coming. Wednesday, on the floor of the House, I had an amendment that would have allowed our veterans to be able to talk to their VA doctors about marijuana. Why should our veterans be treated as second-class citizens in those states where medical marijuana is legal? Why should they not be able to talk to their primary doctor about whether it's right for them or wrong? We weren't successful, but we got 195 votes, including 24 Republicans who said, this doesn't make any sense. And I was told by one of my Republican co-sponsors of the legislation that he was convinced that there were 12 or 13 Republicans who, if they better understood it, would have voted with us. We're on the move. in the United States Congress. We passed an amendment that allows research agriculture institutions to research industrial hemp, which passed with a significant yes vote. We now have a dozen states that are poised to allow industrial hemp production, and we have signals from the administration that these are part of the smaller fish that the administration's not going to fry, that we'll be able to proceed with this. And it's about time. Some of you have been involved with trying to promote not just the use of legal hemp products, which of course they are, and they're sustainable and they're beneficial. It's just that Oregon farmers and ranchers can't grow it. Kentucky tobacco farmers can't grow it. It's got to be imported from outside the United States. Well, we're turning the corner on that. We have to do a better job, I think, of breaking the stranglehold of this pernicious classification that prevents research into marijuana. Up on the Hill, I met with neurologists, people who are dealing with problems of our children. They talked about those with violent epilepsy. These parents are willing to move their families to be able to have access to medical marijuana that will prevent these violent seizures. But the scientists cannot get marijuana to study what works and why. That's an outrage. Oregon was a leader 40 years ago in decriminalization. Oregon has a chance to be the explosion that breaks the dam on marijuana policy nationally. It's great what we have in Washington and Colorado. It's great that we've got 21 states in the District of Columbia with medical marijuana, but we're just on the cusp right now of changing national policy once and for all. It'll be great in Alaska if this summer they legalize adult use, but Alaska is sort of up there and out there. I don't think the land of the midnight sun and Sarah Palin is going to start a national trend. It's great that medical marijuana is on the ballot in Florida this year. 700,000 signatures. But given the Florida Constitution, it'll require a 60% less yes vote to pass, and that's questionable. Here in Oregon, we have an opportunity to cast a ballot for a rational marijuana policy that will be followed across the country. It'll open the floodgates in California in 2016, and we can get down to business. We can tax it, regulate it, keep it out of the hands of the kids, and stop interfering with people's lives. I'd ask you to study it, get involved, sign a petition, and spread the word so that we can have success this November. Oregon can do it. Thank you very much.
Our founding fathers imported hemp into the United States originally. On the street, I can get on out of town, but this here town's my home.
exercise our rights and put on a hymn fest. And we'll educate the youth who soon will rule the land. 'Cause it's just a matter of time, and it's time to take a stand. 'Cause it's a losing battle, one that finally can't win. Been going on for years, just keeps right on going. Like a cold war with the commies, prohibition and the like. You can throw us all in prison, but you cannot win the fight. 'Cause it's a losing battle.
Millions of people wake up suffering from depression, and this plan has proven that it is a cure for depression.
Time to wake up. Yeah.
Greetings from Northeast Portland and from the Capitol and from Salem. Listen, I'm not going to talk long. I know you all have been here for a long day already. I just wanted to update you on what's going on in Salem right now. Now, as you probably know, it's a passage of 91 was just the beginning of a process. Laws don't spell out all the procedures required to make them work, and some of that's being hammered out by the Oregon Liquor Control Commission, as well as some of it in the legislature. In fact, yesterday, the OLCC put together a group of committees that are going to look at rules and licensing and quality and financing and extracts and infused items and growers. They're going to look at all those different issues. But I want to tell you, I'm not going to talk about those. I know that I was asked to speak because of a bill I introduced in the beginning of to start the process of cleaning up some of the effects of the so-called war on drugs. Unfortunately, that bill, 3372, probably isn't going to make it through the process this time. Fortunately, another bill will. Okay? It won't do everything I'd hope, but as Mick Jagger would have been talking about at the legislative process, he said you can't always get what you want. So what are we trying to do? Well, it's important to recognize the extreme criminalization of certain marijuana-related activities has done more harm to our communities than the drug itself ever could. Combined with Measure 11, it put a lot of people behind bars and gave a lot of people felony records for actions that will not be criminal in the future. A stint in prison is not the end of one's so-called debt to society. A felony record can follow you for the rest of your life, closing doors to housing and employment, disrupting families and dragging the whole community down. We should have learned that from the experience of alcohol prohibition in the 1920s and early 30s, but we had to run the experiment again, it seems. And now as we come to our senses and create a system in which cannabis is legal but regulated in the future, we also need to do something about the harm that's been done by the prohibition in the past. And that's why I introduced a bill to create a path to the expungement of records of nonviolent marijuana-related records. And the reduction of sentences for similar offenses for people who are still in custody or under supervision. This is a high priority for me to do something about this, because while I won't deny that crime affects our community, and I won't deny that incarceration sometimes is an appropriate response to criminal acts, I also believe that it has been used too often where it makes no sense at all, creating criminals out of people who are doing no harm. We need to fix that for the future and also reach back and fix what has happened in the past. Now, as I said, 3372 is not going to make it, but details matter a lot in the legislative process, and we just couldn't work out through the details in the time that we had. I understand, however, that there'll be another bill coming through the committee on implementing the Senate and House Committee on implementing Measure 91. In the Capitol, that's called the Joint Committee on Marijuana, just so that you know. Yes, it's a joke, and everyone seems to like it. Well, except for some of the folks here. I urge you to use the online Oregon Legislative Information System, OLIS. Look that up, OLIS, to keep informed about what the committee is doing. And I hope you'll pay more attention to this, more attention to more than this one issue, because I want you to make this issue your gateway issue for more involvement in our policy-making process. Our system works better when people watch and take part, and that means you. And I want to also just thank you for coming out and being so active in the campaign last year, and stay active. We need to have you to continue to listen to what's going on, to watch, to talk with everyone. Know who your legislators are. Do you know who your legislators are? How many of you know who your legislators are? All right, if you don't, you need to look it up and find out who that is and go and talk with them. Let them know that you're out there, let them know that you're watching and that you want to have some things changed. As I said, I don't think my particular bill is going to make it through, but I believe we will get a bill that'll come through in some form that'll work, that'll certainly make things a little better for the folks who have been incarcerated, who have records, and who are presently incarcerated. Maybe we'll get some changes, and that'll only become because you decide to work for it. So thank you very much. Take care.
It's so great to be here. My name is Ted Wheeler. I've got to say, it excites me to have been here today to talk to some of the cannabis industry leaders, some of the cannabis industry entrepreneurs. I am enthusiastic because they are excited, they're pumped, they're visionary, and they're excited about the economic opportunity of this industry for our state, for our region, and of course, for the great city of Portland. The people of this community, as you just heard, overwhelmingly voted for a legal, regulated, taxed cannabis industry. And as long as I am the treasurer for the state of Oregon, which is only about 7 months, and as a candidate for mayor of Portland, I promise you that I'm going to do everything I can to uphold the will of the voters in this community. I think there's a great amount of energy here today. This is a pivotal time for our country, for our state, for our city. But folks, let's be honest, there's a lot more that we need to do. I've heard from so many of the entrepreneurs about the importance of making sure that Portland retains its place as a respectful and open community to the industry. If we do that, what's going to happen is people are going to want to open businesses here, they will want to employ people here, and that can only be a good thing for our economy. Let's also understand that under Measure 91, there were rights that are ascribed to medical marijuana patients. They deserve a safe, respectful, indoor location to consume. That was the intention of Measure 91. And we should work hard to uphold that intention. We also need to acknowledge that the entrepreneurs that were here today, only a year ago, they were criminals, and they were treated as such under Oregon law. And we have to acknowledge that there is a path here to help make sure that Fresh Start Oregon, which was created with the legislature, and other efforts, including expunging over thousands of records, criminal records that were nonviolent in 2015, is help getting people back to where we need to be as a strong community. At the end of the day, here's what we've got to do. We've got to acknowledge the cannabis industry for what it is. It is legal, it is regulated, it is taxed. And it's a tremendous opportunity to uplift our community, help get people employed, reduce income disparity, which we all know is growing across our nation, our state, and our community. And it can be a great boon to our community done right and done well. And as your mayor, I'm pledging to do that.
Thank you, Ted. Thanks, everybody, for being here. I'm Tobias Reed. I'm a Beaverton state representative, and I hope not only to follow Ted Wheeler on stage, but into office as state treasurer. You know, Oregon is a pioneer. We're not the first state to legalize, but we're still well ahead of the curve. It means that the decisions we make in Oregon are going to be the ones that the rest of the country looks to when they legalize. All over the state, legal cannabis businesses are off to a really strong start, exceeding expectations. $14 million in sales in January alone. That doesn't even count medicinal marijuana. And when extracts and edibles come online, that is going to only increase the number. But because the federal government is dragging its feet, it's leaving states like Oregon in a bind. Banks and credit unions can't confidently extend their services to legal cannabis businesses without risking the violation of federal law. And imagine how dangerous and scary that is for cannabis business owners. Perhaps some of you are among them. You have to keep thousands of dollars in cash on hand to meet payroll, to pay taxes, and buy inventory and supplies. We have to do better than that. And while we haven't solved all our problems, that's one of the reasons I helped to pass the cannabis banking bill in Oregon in the legislature. The federal government still needs to act, but we're one step closer by removing criminal liability in Oregon for the provision of banking services. We're helping to remove those duffel bags of cash that are moving around our neighborhoods and putting businesses and neighborhoods at risk. We've got lots more to do, but this is an important first step. And I hope you'll all be with me as we continue that effort. I appreciate you being here and wish you great luck on a successful event. Thanks very much.
It's good to be here in a place where, the voters understand the needs of both the patients and the recreational people. And we all understand that for recreationalists, it's the most benign, therapeutically active substance, protecting your neuroendocannabinoid systems. It's just to deny us the access to this wonderful herb is really sacrilegious. It is a war against the Creator's work. It is a war against the people. Here I am. I have been legal, authorized by the federal government for 27 years. I had to prove to FDA, DEA, and NIDA that cannabis is the most efficient, the most reliable, and the safest part of my treatment. As it turns out, today it is the only part of my treatment. And I am at an age where most of my friends have a medicine cabinets full of nasty drugs that cause them to take other drugs which play havoc on their brain, their liver, their heart, and everything else they're trying to protect that marijuana does well. Gee, it's a wonder the pharmaceutical and the health industry just don't want it to change. They will lose 50% of their business at least the day cannabis takes its rightful place in our society. I applaud you for having made so much progress, but the job's far from over. I don't know why we're not having million marches all over this country behind Bernie Sanders. He's the only one that's come up with a plan that just might work to end the federal war on us. This needs to change. We need to get behind this man. It's the only hope I have seen lately. Changing laws, as long as the feds say no, my doctor still doesn't have the right to practice his Hippocratic oath. In other words, he's not allowed to have the First Amendment of the Constitution, and neither are you, not really. We can rant and rave and all, but we can't even light up. After all those approvals, I don't feel free to light up right now. I don't want to hassle, cause you a problem. This is disgusting. This is ridiculous. And to charge someone that wants to start a cannabis business $5,000 when someone can open a liquor store for $500, there is something really messed up about this. We have come a long ways, but obviously we're not done with this job. We need to change it federally. You need to get rid of the clowns who oppose us. I thank you, Jennifer, for being at those meetings, for saying what needs to be said, and for running for office now. Thank you so much to all of you who keep doing things like that. It's the only thing that's really going to change everything. Remember that freedom isn't really free. So you got to make sure it gets untangled from these bureaucracies, and that your own legislators don't make you suffer. Come on, with this bureaucracy, I lost sight that I had maintained for 37 years when you got greedy and wanted more money than I could pay you for my license to honor my prescription. That's ridiculous. Like my daughter said, man-made booze got Mate pot, who do you trust? Let the true spirit of love always be your guiding light, but don't sit on the job. Don't let another Nixon come in and tear us all down. We're back to where we were in 1980. Are we going to let it all go back to hell again? We're on our way there. We are at the top of the hill. Let's make it all the way and put our flag nice and high, the hemp flag, and start taking care of our environment. Remember that the green leaf is here for the healing of the nations. Remember that, and remember that hemp can and will save the planet. Get rid of those stinky paper mills. Do the right paper with the right crops that we can harvest at least once a year. Give our workers jobs. Please get back to the hemp. You've already voted it in. Let's really work at making a change. Thank you. Love you.
Are to find a way to help the government find ways to help people vote. And I think with television, the telephone, computer optics, and satellite dishes and all this technology that we've got, we should be able to sit home and vote on all these important issues. And I'm sure the government wants everybody to vote. It's our constitutional right, and they stand behind it. I think that they should get behind us and help us to get out there and make voting a very important issue. It is important, even if you're not in favor of, say, the California Marijuana Initiative or the Hemp Initiative, that's fine. We would love for you to come out and speak your opinion. We want you out there voting. We want you to take an active part in this country. If you do, then I think this will solve the problem.
I want to thank you guys for watching. We're going to go out on another great song by Mr. John Coronet. We'll be back next week and help us restore hemp.
Yeah, restore hemp.
Another chapter as we turn the page. We exist within a Ukraine. I know that freedom's heard around the globe. Just where our future lies will nobody know. Oh, let's make the best of it now. 'Cause you never know when the sky will fall. Maybe the moon will reach the earth one day. We're not the same race that we used to be. Can't you see? Now the next time that you fall in